Alright, here's the smoker itself. This one's made by Char Griller. You can see that it's actually a combo of propane and charcoal. The important thing here is the smoke box on the right. You can see that. I'll give you a close-up in a second here. And then you've got the smoker itself there right next to the firebox, and then you've got the propane on the left and a side burner. And as you can see here by the hoses, we got a dog, which was one of the worst decisions we've ever made. In fact, if you look at our yard, there used to be grass and there used to be a garden. And then we got a dog, and now all we have is a dog and a crappy yard. So anyway, here's the firebox itself. It's got a drawer to load the charcoal in, and then a vent system. And if you want to, you can actually grill right over the hot coals, but when you're smoking, you definitely don't do that. Then you've got the smoker itself. It's got a temperature gauge. You kind of got to be careful about that. Sometimes if you load it up with meat too much, the temperature's not all that accurate. You got a smokestack up here on top, and control the airflow, which is very important. And then you got some grill space here on which you put the meat. And then down below, there's a grate, and you can lower it and move it up and down. You can put a drip pan under there, or if you wanted to do charcoal in order to grill, you could do that and move it up closer to the grill. So it's a pretty nice setup. It was about $300 for the whole thing at Lowe's at one point. It was on sale at that point, so I'd say if you probably bought it not on sale, it would be around $400. Okay, here's some more tools of the trade. Start over here on the left. This is a bag of hickory wood chunks. So you want to have some kind of a hardwood that you're going to use to create the smoke flavor for your barbecue. And right there on the ground next to it, the lighter, of course, there's the charcoal chimney. I'll show you that in just a second, a little bit more. That's how you get your charcoal going. This here is a bag of Stubbs briquettes. It's 100% all natural, as you can see, or at least that's what they claim. They're briquettes, like your any regular briquette. They don't have all the chemicals that you get in some of the more commercial brands that we won't mention. The good thing about briquettes is that because they produce about the same amount of heat per briquette, it's easier for you to predict how much heat it's going to generate depending upon the number of briquettes you use. You've got the lump charcoal here, which is just pieces of wood that have been turned into charcoal. They're different sizes. Some are small, some are tiny. So it's a little harder to predict exactly what kind of heat production you're going to get when you just dump a bunch of this in the charcoal stack over here, the chimney. But it can be used. I've used it many times. It's good stuff. It's real wood. And then we've got some hickory chips here. Typically you use chips more if you were going to use a propane type of smoker, where you're just going to heat it up and you're going to put the chips like in a bag of tin foil or a pan and soak them and then have them produce smoke. Usually when you're going to put it in a firebox like this, you use the bigger chunks, which are really bigger pieces of wood, like this, or even bigger. You can see there. So the important thing is that you start your fire about 20 minutes to 30 minutes before you're planning to put the meat on the smoker. So I'm going to start this fire here up in a second and get the coals going, and then get it ready to start smoking. The important thing also is that you smoke somewhere between about 225 and 275. A lot of guys that are barbecue purists really focus on trying to nail that in and drill it down. I've had success even when it's varied a little bit, but it is important you don't let it get too low, because you don't want to keep the meat in a range where it doesn't cook very fast and you potentially get bacteria problems, although the smoke helps eliminate bacteria problems. So Alright, you can see I've filled up the chimney with briquettes, and I've just ripped off a piece of the bag to use for the kindling underneath. So basically I just take the kindling and bunch it up into kind of a ball, and then I just take that chimney and you just kind of move it over the top of it like that, and then you just take your lighter and you just go around and light the different pieces of paper in the different places around. Get that thing going, and you'll start to see smoke coming up. And these chimneys work pretty well. Of course, if my dog hadn't chewed up the propane burner hose, then I would have just stuck it on top of the burner, and that starts it up even faster. But if you don't have one, you can always use the paper. You can see there that it burns pretty well. Once the chimney gets going, you'll see it really starts smoking good. You know your charcoal's caught fire, and eventually you'll see flame coming out the top. And then when the charcoal grays over, that's when it's pretty much ready to be dumped into the firebox. And a lot of times I'll pull that drawer out and just set the charcoal chimney right there on the grate. But because I had to use the paper to get it started, I went ahead and did it on the ground. Alright, here's some more tools of the trade. A good barbecue cookbook. If you haven't done barbecue before, it is key to start out by giving yourself a leg up by learning as much as you can from people who already know a lot. So here's some of the cookbooks that I've used. Backyard Barbecue by Richard McPeak. Smoke and Spice, John Willingham's Barbecue. It's a great one. And here is the one that is the most important, Paul Kirk's Championship Barbecue. There's nothing that I have made out of this cookbook that hasn't been absolutely better than 90% of the restaurants you'll ever find, and maybe even more than that. Great amount of information about how to barbecue. Pretty much most of what I learned came out of that book. So right now I'm starting with making a rub. Get my shadow out of here. I'm a kind of a copyright zealot, so I'm not going to reveal the recipe that I used for the rub. You want that, you buy Paul Kirk's Championship Barbecue, and find it in there. But sorry for the background noise, there's a birthday party going on. But basically I just took the ingredients, threw them in the blender. I'm going to pulse that a few times, and the rub will be ready to go. Okay, as you can see, the rub's nice and smooth after being pulsed, and it is ready to apply. So we'll pull out the pork butt and slather it with mustard, and then we'll put all this rub on it and get it ready to put it on the grill. Alright, here's the piece of meat, the pork butt, and we'll be cooking it fat side down. The reason for that is that fat and juices don't really start flowing until the roast hits about 160, 170, and so we're going to keep it fat side down for the first couple 3 hours, and then we'll flip it over so that a nice crust forms on the non-fat side. Of course, I won't be able to show you putting it on the grill because it got dark. I went to go get the roast out of the fridge and it had bled everywhere. So anyway, it got dark, so I'll show you how I prep it. Basically, I'm just going to put mustard on it, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so as you can see, I've just basically taken some spicy brown mustard and just slathered it all over the roast. The reason to do that is because it gets more rub to stick to it. If you just put rub on there, you can do that, or you can mix it with Worcestershire and paint it on, but the mustard seems to allow more of the rub to stick to it, which ends up with a little more flavor available to you at the end when you're doing that prep work. So I just put it in a bowl, grab one of those little paint brushes and paint it on. So next thing I do is apply the rub, and the rub I put in like an old spice container with big holes in the top, as you can see there, and that allows you to get a lot of rub on. You know, don't be too easy on the rub. It mostly cooks, so you need to get as much on there as you can. So this is what it looks like once you've covered it with rub and it's ready to go on the grill. So like I said, it's dark, but I'm going to put it out on the grill, leave it on there for about 2 to 3 hours with the fat side down, and then flip it and turn it around so it's facing the opposite direction, so it's not too close to the firebox and you don't get too much burning going on there. And the most important thing here is that I pulled it straight out of the fridge, did this, it's going right on the grill. The longer the time you have of cold meat with smoke, the more smoke penetration you're going to get. Once the meat hits about 120, you're not going to get much more smoke penetration, so it's important to just hit it with tons of smoke as much as you can for the first 4 hours. Alright, so I'm whipping up some basting sauce. This one's got ketchup, Heinz 57, vinegar, water, some mustard, some liquid smoke, a little bit of salt. So anyway, you make up this basting sauce, and once there's a bark on that pork butt, then you start drenching it, and you just use this kind of a little mop. Soaks up the liquid really well and delivers it to the meat, and it's just really to keep the exterior of the meat moist. With the pork butt, it's not as important as it is with, say, ribs or a brisket or something like that. That's not as fatty, at least the top of the brisket. With the pork butt, not quite as important, but for flavor's sake, it is very important, and you'll see why a little later. Alright, so we're about 4 hours into the cooking process. I just pulled it off of the smoker. As you can see, there's a pretty nice bark on there. That's about what you expect to see. You see a little bit of cracks where with the heat is starting to, the fat's starting to break apart. So you see a few cracks at this point. I'm going to go ahead and baste it again. And one of the things that I do that is probably different than a lot of people who barbecue is I cook it the rest of the way in the oven. Once I've smoked it to the point where it can't take any more smoke, about 120 degrees, I pull it off and I just put it in the oven at about 250 and let it go from there until it hits a little over 200 degrees. And I find that the drippings don't start to really come out of the meat until you hit about 160, 170, and then from there on to about 210 you get a lot of drippings, a lot of the collagen breaks down, and you end up with a pan full of drippings. So the bark isn't going to be quite as hard on the outside, but what you are going to have is now a bunch of drippings that you can now recombine with the meat to make it a lot more juicy and a lot more flavorful and get that barbecue flavor all throughout the meat. And you'll see that when we pull it later. So I'm going to go ahead and baste it some more, throw a little bit more rub on there, and then I'll put an aluminum foil tent over it, and we'll stick it in the oven for probably another 8 hours. Alright, I've also just stuck the thermometer in there. As you can see, we're hanging around 135 at this point. So we're well past the point where it's going to take any more smoke. So the next 70 degrees, which is about how much more we're going to do, is probably going to go at about 10 degrees an hour. So I'm going to put it in for probably another 7 to 8 hours. I'm going to tent it with some aluminum foil, and should be very much ready at that point. Alright, so you can see that I've basically just taken a couple pieces of tin foil, laid them loosely over the top, and then I kind of pinched it down the center, tented it up so it's not like right against the meat or anything, so that the moisture as it comes out of the meat will kind of stay collected there inside, and it will moisten up the bark a little bit, but not enough that it does anything bad. In fact, it probably makes it even better. So it keeps it nice and moist. I don't have to baste it as often, and still get a great product at the end. Alright, it's been in the oven all night long. It's been about 6 hours since the last time I looked at it. It's, if you can see that, it's only 170 degrees. So it goes pretty slow with a roast this size going only at 250. As you can see, it's starting to give off juices at this point. So I'm going to baste it again at this point, but you can see because of the tent it's nice and moist. I'm going to go ahead and baste it again anyway, just because the basting sauce adds so much flavor. But we probably got a few more hours. It's been only coming up about oh, probably 6 or 7 degrees per hour, which is pretty normal. So it's probably got a few more hours to go yet until we hit around somewhere between 190 200 is when you can stop and start pulling it. Alright, so it's been about half an hour since I basted it, and as you can see the temperature really hasn't moved at all, which is fairly common because the closer the temperature of the meat gets to the oven temperature, that's more slowly it's going to go. So I'm actually going to move the temperature up to 275 to try to help increase the gap between the two temperatures and increase the speed of cooking, because at this rate we're not going to be done until about 6 hours from now. It's been about almost 12 hours since the roast was started smoking, so typically you can expect anywhere from 12 to 16 hours with one of these. At this rate though, it's just going to go too slow, so I'm going to up the temperature and we'll check back later. This is the dog who chewed up the propane tank hoses, and his torture payback for that is to make him be in the house while the roast is in the oven, finishing cooking after it's been smoked, because it drives him completely out of his flippin' mind to smell it. So that's how we get back at him. AJ, it's either that or cook you and eat you. You want some roast? Yeah, see, he sits, he waits, because he knows that if he sits, he gets to eat. Alright, so the cooking is done. It got up to about 195, and I'm just starting the pulling process, starting to pull apart the meat, and then we'll recombine with some drippings. Unfortunately, as you can see, I have too big of a pan for this roast, and so the drippings kind of got burned a little bit. We'll still try to make it work, but normally if you have a small enough pan or you have more meat in that pan, you'll end up with quite a lot of drippings getting it up to this temperature, and that really makes a huge difference in the flavor of the meat. So hopefully this will still turn out well. Usually it always does. One thing I wanted to also show is, you can see there that pink, this pink color right here, that is from the smoke, and you can see that there's a full ½ inch of penetration, and that's because we started out with the roast very cold, hit it with a lot of smoke, and I got a lot of good penetration, so the flavor should be great. One thing you'll notice when you do this is that if you take a piece here from the center that's still quite white, that wasn't near the edge, if you taste it, it will just taste like regular, normal, soft, good pork, but you won't have that smoke flavor. And so the important thing here is when you're shredding it, is that you get a lot of the bark. You can see the bark here on these different pieces. You get a lot of that bark and the smoke flavor well combined, and then the drippings with that also, that smoke flavor added back in to the shredded meat helps to keep that smoke flavor throughout the entire roast when you shred it up. Okay, as you're pulling the pork, one of the most important things is to get the fat out of the meat. Now, a lot of people say that fat is what gives flavor, but that's actually not true. If you don't believe me, go ahead and pop a piece of it in your mouth and chew it up and see how much you like it. Nobody likes to get a piece of fat like this in their pulled pork sandwich. So make sure you clear that out, and then once you do, you can just start to pull the pork, and just make sure as you go through that you're getting all those little fat and membrane and things like that out of there, so that it's just meat. And then when we recombine the juices, then you'll get all that smoke flavor back in there, and that's where the real flavor comes from, is actually the juices and the collagen that breaks down and comes out as drippings. That's where the flavor is, not the fat. Okay, one of the things I do on a day where I've had a bad dripping day, like today where I burned the drippings, is I try to chop it with a knife, and that helps to get more of the bark and the smoked meat into the overall dish, as you can see there. And I have to say that as I'm cutting this, the smell is incredible, and that's all I can do to keep myself from just grabbing it and eating every single bit of it. So when you do this kind of barbecue, it is just so much better than anything you're going to find in probably 90-95% of the restaurants. It's hard to even put it together for other people to eat, because you want to eat it so much. So I'm going to keep on going here. Hopefully we end up with more than this, but if we don't, you'll know where it went. Okay, so the pork's all chopped up, like I said earlier. Normally I would have shredded this, but because of the issue with the burning of the drippings, I wanted to get as much of the bark and the smoked meat in combined with the center meat as possible. And you can tell I've been eating this, but as you can see, there's quite a lot of pink in here, so that's where we get all of our flavor. I'm going to take some chicken broth and combine it with some of the fatty stuff and some of the drippings, and try to get some moisture that I can put back into this meat. See how that works. One other thing I forgot to mention earlier is one way you can tell when it's done is that bone comes out very clean. You can see that there's no meat stuck to it to speak of at all, and so we know that it was done based on that level of tenderness. So I'm going to go ahead and try to see if I can moisten this up a little bit, and then we'll go from there. Okay, what I've done is I took all that stuff you saw in the pan before, all the extra fat and the bark that was attached to fat, and then even some of the goo that wasn't quite burned onto the pan, and any drippings that were in there, and I put them in with some homemade chicken broth and just brought them up to a boil. Just kind of stirred it up, and one of the things that you always should do before you add anything to your dish is taste what you're going to add by itself and see if it's good. If it tastes gross, it will be gross in your food. So never make the mistake of thinking, oh well, once it's in there it'll be fine. Don't do it. If it doesn't taste good, don't put it in. I did taste this, and it tastes just like the drippings do when everything works out the way it should, with a smaller pan and so forth, like I explained earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a little bit of a trial run where I'm going to take a small amount of pork, small amount of these drippings, combine them, taste it, and then if we're good, I'll combine it with the whole dish. Okay, I poured it through a strainer so you can see there's all the pieces that were being used to get that flavor. You can see what the chicken broth looks like now that I've done that combination, and like I said, it tastes pretty much like pork drippings after it's been smoked. So what I'm going to do is a little trick to separate the fat. I used to have a fat separator, somebody dropped it. So right now I just use a gallon Ziploc bag. I pour this into the bag, and then the fat floats to the top, and then you just slightly cut one of the corners and let it drain out until you get to the point where you start to see the fat getting close to the opening, and then you just stop draining it. And then you just get drippings and no fat. Okay, here's the Ziploc bag and the drippings, and you can see the fat on top there has been separated. So I'm just going to slightly cut the corner down there. I'm not going to cut the corner off because then it'll drop into the drippings. But I'm going to slightly cut the corner, and I'm going to let it drain into the bowl until I start to see the fat getting close. And then once I see the fat getting close, I will stop. We'll only have drippings. Okay, I've separated the fat and just got drippings there. I just tasted it. It made me want to cry, so that's a good sign. I'm going to go ahead and do a little test with a little bit of meat, and then we'll probably combine with the whole thing. Okay, I put a little bit of meat in this bowl and put some drippings in it. I'm going to go ahead and give it a taste. And it is absolutely outstanding. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in with the rest of the pork. One thing as far as serving pulled pork, you should never serve it sauced. You should always serve it dry like this, and then let people add sauce if they want it. Anytime you go and you get pulled pork and it's just covered in sauce, all you're tasting is the sauce. It's not about the meat, it's about the sauce at that point, and that usually means whoever made it screwed it up and it tastes very good, so they covered it in sauce so that you wouldn't notice. So this kind of pulled pork is so good that it makes you want to cry with no sauce, and if you put sauce on it, usually you're masking the fact you screwed it up. So make it so good they want to cry without any sauce at all, and you've had success. Okay, so there is the finished product, proper pan of pulled pork. You can see the color. You can see that it's been nicely smoked, a lot of nice bark and colored smoked meat distributed throughout. It's got the drippings in there with a nice flavor from the smoke. And so it is ready to go, ready to, we'll pop it in the oven, cover it, pop it in the oven at 200 degrees until it's time to serve it, and it should be delicious. So I hope you enjoyed this, and hope that as you go out and make it yourself, that you'll be able to have equal success. It does take some work and some practice, but it is well worth it. It eclipses pretty much anything you're going to find outside of the top-notch barbecue restaurants.